I wasn't necessarily sure if I'd be able to follow the events in Game Change because I'm not that knowledgeable about elections in the States, but I'm trying to watch every Woody Harrelson film, so I thought I'd give it a go. I also really love Julianne Moore, so I figured there was enough in this for me to enjoy even if I couldn't follow it, but I'm really pleased to say that actually it was pretty easy to follow this narrative and to understand what was going on. Yes, there will be certain aspects that went over my head, but the point there is that if, like me, you don't really understand a lot of American politics, there is still an opportunity to enjoy this because it's not that difficult to understand. It is easy to get to grips with what's happening. And yes, there will be things that I probably didn't pick up on, things that maybe don't mean anything to me, but I never felt like I was struggling to follow along, and I'm really pleased about that. This was released in 2012. It's directed by Jay Roach, and it's written by Danny Strong, based on the book by Mark Halperin and John Scheunemann. And this, of course, stars Julianne Moore as Sarah Palin. We have Ed Harris as John McCain, and Woody Harrelson plays Steve Schmidt. I'd never heard of Steve Schmidt. I had, of course, heard of Sarah Palin and John McCain. And this is about how McCain chose Sarah Palin as his running mate in the election. And it's basically about the election focusing on the involvement of Sarah Palin. And I have to say, they should release these films. Obviously, it doesn't make sense in terms of time, but this film would be brilliant as part of a campaign package because I was really fully engaged with the characters. I really wanted to follow their story. I genuinely believed in everything that they were saying, and I wanted the best for them. So I don't think it would be possible time-wise to release a feature film as part of a political campaign, but it seems like a strategy that could work. I will say that as I said, I don't know that much about American politics, but I also didn't really know that much about Sarah Palin in terms of her background. I've obviously seen many clips of her floating around the internet, and the casting, the appearance of Julianne Moore is absolutely incredible. And maybe if I'd known a lot more about Sarah Palin, I wouldn't think that. I don't know. But from my perspective, visually, absolutely incredible casting there. And I'm just going to assume that her mannerisms and the way she spoke were brilliant as well, because I feel like the casting there is spot on from my amateur perspective. And the narrative itself is very interesting. It starts off very positive, and everybody's really excited to have Sarah Palin as the future vice president, and everything's going really well. And then, of course, as things develop, they come up against problems. We have problems with the press and the fact that they're obviously digging really deeply into Sarah Palin's personal life, which from my perspective, watching this film was interesting because it meant that I could learn about her and her background. But obviously at the time, that would have been incredibly stressful and frustrating because they're trying to look for dirt, basically. That's what the press does. And then there are obviously issues coming up with the campaign, and not everything is going smoothly. And as a story, it's quite compelling. I don't know if this is 100% accurate to how things went. I'm going to assume it was because obviously it's very close to the events beginning in 2008, and it would be a strange choice to take creative liberties with this narrative, considering it was released 4 years later. But if anybody does have any information on that, if there is any inaccuracies in the film, please feel free to let me know. I'd be very keen to learn more about that. So there are a few ways of looking at this. Is it an accurate representation of the events? Obviously, as I said, released 4 years after the fact, people are still going to have this fresh in their mind. But in 30, 40, 50 years' time, can somebody watch this to get a good understanding of what events were like? I don't have the answer for that, so I'd love for somebody to fill that gap for me. Could somebody watch this as a de facto documentary in 40, 50 years' time and get an accurate understanding of how the campaign went? The other way of looking at it is it enjoyable as a film? Absolutely, yes, it is. And I'm not the biggest fan of political films. I don't have a problem with them, but I don't necessarily gravitate towards them unless there's a reason to watch it. Obviously, with this one, we have the cast. I will fully admit that if it wasn't Woody Harrelson or Julianne Moore, I would probably never have watched this. So I'm glad that I had a reason to, because I feel more informed. Definitely feel like I have a stronger education about this now. And as a narrative, it was really compelling. And I kind of liked the fact that I didn't know much about this, because it meant that while I was aware of the final outcomes, I do know some things about American politics. I was aware of the final outcomes. I didn't really know what the journey was like. So for me, I was invested in the narrative. I was keen to find out what would happen next or what problem they'd encounter next. And for me, that was really interesting. So I do think that depending on your perspective, it might be a completely different experience. And I think that that's a great thing about films like this, or in fact, any film. I suppose any film will depend on your perspective. But certainly when it's based on a true event, everybody's going to have different levels of knowledge and different interests. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd like it. I wasn't sure if I'd understand it. I'm pleased to say it was pretty easy to follow, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Game Change is one that I definitely recommend. And if you've been considering watching this, but you've been on the fence, give it a go. Really enjoyable film. It is long. It's nearly 2 hours, and I don't usually have the patience for films that are very long, but I feel like the time went by really quickly. So that also works in the film's favour. Game Change is a very strong film from my perspective. I'd love to know what you think of it from your perspective, but personally, I'm very happy to recommend it.